Thank you.
Here you go.
Thank you, thank you. Hi, you guys.
Stand by the X.
Going to the X. Oh, yeah. Okay. Whoops. Get my bearings here for a moment. How are you? Are you ready to talk about sex? Okay. Third speaker, getting near lunch hour. We got to kind of keep you engaged here. What a wonderful venue. I'm so glad that I'm here. So, like all of you in this room, I am the sum total of many selves. You are the sum total of your many selves. Among those selves is my academic self. I teach at Northwestern University an undergraduate class, relationship skill building class called Marriage 101. I train graduate students how to do couples therapy. I teach and present in all kinds of venues like this. I just wrote this book. Another really important part of myself is I've been the intimate partner to Todd Solomon for going on 19 years of marriage. Oh, it's a thing. That's the thing. Thank you. The thread that holds together all of these selves is my passion about connection. I'm passionate about love. Specifically, I'm passionate about what it takes to bring our best and bravest selves to our love lives. It is the heart of the book that I just wrote, and it's the thread that holds together all of my professional work and certainly who I am as a spouse. So, the heart of my book, Loving Bravely, is this idea of relational self-awareness. So when it came time for me to write this book, I was really aware that the message I wanted to really work on was my understanding that the above all precursor to a great romantic relationship is relational self-awareness. Without an ongoing commitment to holding up a mirror and looking curiously and compassionately at what every moment of your romantic relationship, from the first date to the 19th year of marriage, what that stirs in you. It's so easy to get focused on this, right? The sort of finger pointing, the blame, the swiping. My soulmate is here. I just kind of keep swiping until I find him or her. To kind of take an external focus in our love lives. And what I know to be true is when we take the risk of the work of self-awareness, looking at what a particular moment, our partner's words, the look on their face, whatever it is, what that stirs in us, that's the avenue towards dynamic, passionate relationships that can go the distance. So relational self-awareness is a paradigm shift. It's a practice, that willingness to look curiously and compassionately at what your love life is stirring within you. The idea that real love starts with you, looking at your romantic relationship as a classroom, yourself as a student, your romantic partner as a teacher. And it goes the other way around as well. You are a teacher to your romantic partner. And that the curriculum of your relationship offers you opportunities again and again and again to learn. So in my work, we can take this idea of relational self-awareness and we can look at any aspect of our love lives using this as our tool. But today, we're going to take this idea to one place and one place only, which is the bedroom. And we're going to talk about the role of relational self-awareness when it comes to sex. And how does relational self-awareness open the door to really dynamic, wonderful sex? And in order for us to do that, I have to tell you a story. Okay, so it's a story that has not been told on stage. It has not been told to many people. But when Mark invites you to be a MOTU speaker, you've got to figure out what your growing edge is. What may scare the shit out of you a little bit. And for me, it's a story. So this story, I trust, thank you, I can do this. I trust that this story will be a doorway for us to talk about some really important aspects of sex. Here we go. It was many years ago. Todd Solomon and I were hanging out in his apartment, and it was time to go from hanging out to hanging out. It's a story of a handstand, not, sadly, the gorgeousness of this handstand. It was time to go from hanging out to hanging out. So I offer up, Lord knows why, I offer up, do you want to see me do a naked handstand? It seemed like such a good idea at the moment. Like, what the moment was calling for was a naked handstand. He, being a young man, says, sure, I will bear witness to your naked handstand. So I slide on over to what must have been a jam box, because this was pre-Spotify, turn on what I'm assuming was Joe Cocker's You Can Leave Your Hat On, because what else would you use in a moment like this? And I break out all of my finest dance moves as I disrobe. I head over to the wall, kick up into said handstand, and whack my foot against the corner of his couch and fly headlong into the wall, crumpling in a pile of nakedness and despair. Are you with me? I apologize for the visuals that are being created in your heads at this moment. Okay. Now, I can stand on this stage and tell you guys a story without really even so much breaking a sweat or getting choked up, because the memory in my brain is coded as a sweet, playful, humorous, not super shame-loaded memory. I have some of those as well. But in my brain, it's sort of a sweet, fun, playful memory. And why is that? It's because, in large part, what happened next was that Todd rushed over, kind of landed on top of me and covered me with his fully clothed body and just kind of held me, and we laughed. So, that's not the handstand. This story then becomes kind of a gateway for us to look at some important aspects of our sexuality, who we are as sexual people, and what kind of relationship do we need to have to ourselves in order to open the door for great sex. I want to put two caveats out there. The first is, as we continue here, I invite you to study your reactions. So this idea of self-awareness, we can bring it wherever we go. So notice your reactions to me, to the ideas I'm presenting. Notice where you kind of open, feel curious, want to learn more. Notice where you kind of feel yourself tightening or closing or feeling reactive, wanting to push something away. Each of those reactions that stir within you, it's a piece of data, right? It's a piece of data about you, your growing edges, where you are, what's easy for you, what's a struggle for you. So just pay attention to that as we work through this. The second piece is I want to just name for you the paradigm that I bring when we talk about sex, because I want to make sure that I own my perspective. It is my perspective that that our sexual selves, for every single one of us, it's just an aspect of self. And when we are in integrity, as Mark was talking about this morning, that sexual self is accessible to us. It's a part of who we are. We can make discerning choices about whether and how we express it, but that it's just a part of who we are. Now, in this world we live in, it's really hard to keep our sexual selves a fully, wholly integrated part of who we are, right? There's tons of messaging around sex. We have experiences oftentimes in our lives, traumatic experiences, that make that sexual self kind of be split off, put in a corner, and feel rather dangerous and disintegrated. But I believe that our bravest work is to kind of name that and do what it takes to return us to the place that we all belong, which is having our sexuality and our sexual expression be an integrated part of who we are. So those are my two disclaimers. What this story about the failed handstand opens up for us are a few avenues. The first of which is the importance, I think, of humor and play in the sexual experiences that we create. In order to have amazing sex, you must at least create a space for absurdity. Even if absurdity does not arrive, it must at least have been invited to the party. You deserve to put yourself in situations where if and when shit goes sideways, it's okay. you can stay in that space and you're with a partner who can meet you in that space. Those are the kinds of sexual experiences that we need and deserve to create for ourselves, where humor and play are an aspect of sexual expression. I love that photo. I mean, she's just like rocking like a ridiculous handstand. Okay. What makes this difficult is that the images of sex that we consume in media, everything from romantic comedies to pornography, doesn't really make space for when things go wrong, when there's something silly, humorous, playful, right? We see seamlessness. And when we then line up our own experiences against what we see in media, we can feel inadequate, wrong, off track. So a part of sexual self-awareness is being able to discern between the images that we see of sex and what real life embodied sex is. And that we can have those conversations with the people we're partnering with for sex, where together we can embrace and make peace with the profound, imperfect nature of sexual experiences. Okay. Oh, it's a little hard to see, but don't worry, I'll talk you through it. Another place that this story of the failed handstand takes us is into a conversation about the importance of compassion. I think we all need and deserve to relate to our sexual selves with tremendous, tremendous self-compassion. So I want to start by bringing your attention to this image. These are Kintsugi pots that my daughter, Courtney and I, made last fall. I heard about Kintsugi because years ago, a graduate student of mine wrote a self-reflective paper about her journey, and she used Kintsugi pottery to capture her relationship with herself. Here's what Kintsugi pottery is. It's a Japanese ceramics technique that when a piece of pottery falls and breaks, rather than throwing it away or getting some glue and trying to make it, repair it so that nobody knows it was ever broken, you instead draw the eye to the imperfections. You take molten precious metal and put the pieces back together using that precious metal and draw the eye to what had been broken. And I just think it's such a powerful way to honor like our healing journey and to trust and believe that there is beauty and strength and growth and wisdom and knowledge and opportunity for all of us in our broken places. I learned that Beyonce used the image of Kintsugi in Lemonade. So, I mean, this is like, the idea is cutting edge here. Okay. Groundbreaking. But it's beautiful, right? I mean, that was the work of the Lemonade album, was sort of this idea of like surviving, right? What's we survive and gives us opportunities to grow from. Okay, so the failed handstand, the brokenness of the handstand itself opened a door for Todd to step through and be in that really empathic, attuned space, right? He knew intuitively, instinctively what to do in that moment. He knew not to back away. He knew not to run. He knew not to laugh, praise the Lord. He knew to come towards me. So that the brokenness of the moment gave him the gift of experiencing himself as empathically attuned to his girlfriend, right? And that's a neat when life gives us opportunities to really tune ourselves into somebody else's experience. It also, but the piece that is important to think about also is that in order for me to meet Todd's empathic attunement, I had to have at least a modicum of self-compassion, right? He's coming towards me, wanting to comfort me. If I was absent self-compassion, in a place of shame, right? Shame is the absence of self-compassion. If I was in a place of shame, what I would have done with his effort to comfort me is one of two things. I would have gone into fight, or I would have gone into flight, right? This is what we do when if someone's offering comfort and we feel like we're absolutely, worthless, broken, damaged, and shame-filled, we can't take in comfort. I would have done fight, perhaps, by making the whole thing his fault. What kind of a pervert agrees to like watch their girlfriend do a handstand? What's wrong with you? It makes no sense, right? I mean, that is irrational. But shame makes us do all kinds of like low-end, irrational, knee-jerk kinds of stuff, right? I'm sure everyone in this room has a story of that. I know I certainly do. The other thing, that if I had been full of shame and had not even a little space for self-compassion, the other thing I would have done possibly would be flight, right? To flee the situation, either physically running into the bathroom or just emotionally, kind of shutting down, detaching, withdrawing, retreating. That's what shame makes us do, right? So in order to meet his empathy, in order to be able to soak up his empathy and his attunement to me, I had to have at least a little sense that I was somebody worthy enough of this kind of comfort. So let's make sure that we understand. I want to just kind of operationalize for you what self-compassion means. Kristen Neff is our self-compassion guru. She's the researcher in this area. Her work on self-compassion is really important. And she says there are 3 elements of self-compassion. One is self-kindness. We're in conversation with ourselves all day, every day. What's the quality of the conversation we're having with ourselves? We all deserve, when we're in a self-compassionate space, the conversation we're having with ourselves is we're talking to ourselves the way we would talk to a very dear friend. I wouldn't say to a very dear friend, oh my God, like why the fuck would you do a naked handstand? Like, God, that's just so weird. Why would you do that? So I ought not to talk to myself that way. Common humanity is that idea of just really trusting and believing that there's no such thing as new pain, right? Whatever we're experiencing, whatever the quality of our suffering in any given moment, we're not the first, we're not the last, we're not the only person who has felt what we're feeling. So that common humanity, just letting ourselves off the hook. We're not worse than everybody else. We're not less than everybody else. And then mindfulness, which we know is that practice of again and again bringing ourselves to the present moment and sort of dropping the story about how all my screw-ups led to this, or that's the rewinding or the fast forwarding. Oh my gosh, this means he's going to break up with me, he's going to leave me, I'm destined to a life of loneliness, right? But staying in the present moment without story and just being present to what the experience is. So, of all of ourselves, all of those aspects of ourselves, the aspect of ourselves that deserves the most self-compassion is our sexual self. So what might it be like to relate to your sexual self with profound self-compassion? Another piece here to talk about is the nature of sexual desire. Which is a really large topic that I have just a few things to say to you about. Sexual desire is a motivational space. Sexual desire is an energetic that leads us to be wanting to or willing to create sexual experiences. Sexual desire is a motivational space. Sexual desire is also a really fickle beast, especially when we create longer-term, sexually monogamous pair bonds. She's a fickle beast. She comes and she goes. Research has indicated that it is normal to experience ebbs and flows of sexual desire in our romantic relationships. In fact, a study done with David Schnarch, a sex therapist and researcher, did with over 20,000 couples, found that 85% of couples always, usually, or sometimes experience challenges around sexual desire. Only 15% of couples report that they are Energizer bunnies, ready, willing, and able whenever the moment is there. It is normal to experience ebbs and flows of sexual desire. So I want to ask you, if and when you're in that moment in your relationship, how might it change the experience of struggling with sexual desire if you were able to remind yourself and know that it's normal to experience ebbs and flows around sexual desire? I think knowing that and normalizing it changes the relationship to it. It cuts us off from shifting into a space of what's wrong with me, what's wrong with you, what's wrong with us. Those kinds of questions, those blaming or shaming questions, tend to get us nowhere. They're dead ends. So the first piece I want to just kind of point out here is that if we view and remember and trust that it's normal for sexual desire to ebb and flow, how might that change the experience of it? The second thing I want to say, when I'm working with couples especially, is that sexual desire challenges are couple problems. When a couple is struggling with sexual desire, it's not really hard to figure out which one is the higher desire partner and which one is the lower desire partner. But I can promise you that it does very little good to talk about it that way. What's wrong with you that your desire is so high? What's wrong with you that your desire is so low? We're going to get nowhere. We have to keep a frame around it as it's a couple problem that invites us to stand shoulder to shoulder and look together at the question of what can we do in this relationship to support, nurture, cultivate desire? A really, really good question. It's a question that Esther Perel invites us into. She's got really beautiful work around the nature of sexual desire. If love is about having and desire is about wanting, then how, in our couple relationships, can we continue to want something that we already have? Beautiful question for couples to sit with, and there are no simple answers. But I know that for sure, if it's not framed as a couple problem, we're going to slip into blame and shame and get nowhere. The third piece to say about the nature of sexual desire is if you are the one who struggles to get over the hump to hump, I invite you to look at this idea that bringing sexy back, getting in touch with your sexual self, it requires a willingness to look at what creates or constrains the conditions for your desire to emerge. And before you do this, you have to promise me that you're going to use the old school definition of sexy and not the new school definition of sexy. Originally, being sexy meant being full of sexual energy. It's what I was pre-handstand, right? I was full of divine, goddess, high-quality sexual energy. I was in my zone. I was, as Csikszentmihalyi, the psychologist would say, I was in flow. What helps you feel that way? That's the original definition of sexy, being full of sexual energy, feeling really comfortable and tapped into sexual energetic flow. Sadly, the word sexy has become sort of perverted, and now it means being seen as sexy, right? Being desirable in somebody else's eyes. It's become a subject who deems an object to be sexy. It's problematic. It's problematic especially for women. If we are, in a sexual experience, obsessed with whether or not we're being perceived as sexy, whether we're pleasing enough, performing well enough, I can guarantee you your pleasure is going to be nowhere to be found. Right? What if being sexy returned to the old school definition of what helps you fill yourself with divine sexual energy? It's why I think there's such an orgasm gap for heterosexual sex, especially heterosexual sex that happens in the context of a hookup. So hookup sex tends to be especially a difficult situation for her, if there's a woman involved, for her to find and experience her own pleasure. Because tapping into what helps you feel willing to enter that space, naked handstand, whatever the fuck it is, it takes some guts. It takes some safety. It takes a willingness to be playful, and all of that's really hard to do when there's not kind of like a trusting bond. I'm not making a judgment call around hookup sex, but I am inviting you into a perspective that says that if and when you create sexual experiences, I would like you to center it around your pleasure. Your pleasure ought to be at least one piece of the overall equation. And when I talk about this, I'm surprised again and again for how many women that's a new idea. So I want to just name that really clearly. Okay, we did our 3 things on. Okay, so while we're talking about women and pleasure and sexuality, I invite you to look at this, the human sexual response cycle. Masters and Johnson and Kaplan used this model for many, many, many years to talk about what normal, healthy, red-blooded sex is. It begins with desire, the sort of tingling in the loins that leads you to want to create a sexual experience. It proceeds to arousal. It goes to plateau. Then comes orgasm. If you are very lucky, another orgasm or 2, and then resolution. This was the gold standard definition of what a human sexual response looks like. Which means that if you didn't experience the arc in this way, you were pathologized. You had a disorder. You had a problem. The issue is, it turns out many, many people don't follow this arc. Many, especially female people, don't tend to follow this arc, especially when they're not in a new situation, when they're with an established partner. They tend to not experience this. In fact, for many women, arousal precedes desire. Or desire, that's sort of like, I gotta go get me some, is a relatively rare kind of a thing. So we could pathologize most people in this room, or we could maybe start to ask questions about perhaps this model, it suits, I think it does probably suit the experience of some women and many men, but what could we do differently? So what we could do differently is we have researchers like Bassan who created a different model. This one looks a heck of a lot more like the female physique itself. It's curvy, it's nonlinear, things are going in all kinds of directions. And it better captures the experience that many women have, which is sometimes sexual desire, I gotta get me some. Sometimes that's the entryway into an experience, but sometimes not. Sometimes it's a great conversation, great walk on the beach. Sometimes it's erotic stimuli. 50 Shades of Grey did not sell a gazillion copies for no reason. So there are many, so the idea here is it's normal to look at and consider many pathways in to a sexual experience. It turns out, this is the work now of Emily Nagoski, that there's two kinds of desire. Spontaneous desire that leads you into that motivational state to create sexual experience. There's also responsive desire, desire that responds to the environment, the great conversation, the sexual stimuli, your partner asking you, you feeling something happening? Well, I wasn't, but it could. My mentor, our mentor Cheryl Rampage, said, if you're a woman, especially if you're a woman, 30-ish or above, in a long-term relationship, and your partner is a decent partner, and they are curious to have a sexual experience with you, and you can't think of a really great reason not to, go ahead and start, and your body may catch up, and you'll probably feel glad that you did afterwards. That is advice that is only, this is advice that I give 1,000 caveats before I talk about this with my college students, because for college students on a college campus, this is not how we ought to begin our experiences. Some years I leave it out because I'm just like, I don't think they're going to hear this the right way. But when I'm talking to people who are in established relationships or who are looking to create established relationships, I think there's such freedom that comes from knowing that I'm not damaged, broken, or deficient, because sometimes I have to be cued by something in my environment to be like, oh, I do like sex. Yeah, we could do that. That's okay. That's normal. That's okay. And I think it gives a sense of relief if your partner was somebody who's more like this, that you aren't the one who initiates because you just need a cue. And it can help them feel like less like there's something wrong with them, right? So I think this is really important information to have. Okay. I think that's all I had on that. So to wrap up, I think that when we do the work of understanding who we are sexually, and we take a curious and compassionate stance towards our sexual selves, sex in a long-term relationship, especially a sexually monogamous long-term relationship, sex becomes a playground. It becomes a place for exploration, play, kind of relief from the stresses of the outside world. It becomes a place to claim pleasure, a place to take risks. And for you, I have no idea what you might do in that sexual playground. Maybe it would be a naked handstand. Perhaps it wouldn't. But what I do know to be true is that with that self-awareness, that continued practice with yourself, you are limited only by the bounds of your own imagination. Thank you very much.